Hey guys, this is the second episode for the Computer Science X Self Development series. And in this episode, we'll be talking about a certain concept which could be used in organizations interchangeably. And this concept is to talk about how goals could be approached in an organization and also in our personal lives. More specifically, goals that are assigned to teams and colleagues and employees, and also goals we assign to ourselves, and so on. Let's get started, and I'll see you when I'm on my whiteboard. See you guys. Right, guys, so I'm on my whiteboard here, and I'll be explaining the computer science concept. I'll be linking to the main point I'm trying to make in today's lecture. So, today we'll be talking about a concept called serial and parallel transmission. Serial and parallel transmission is essentially how a sender and a recipient communicate. And as usual, I'm not going to get into too much technical depth, but essentially is where we have a sender communicating with a receiver. And these are two different forms of communication, serial and parallel. Serial and parallel are two different forms of communicating information between a sender and a recipient. And this is especially in the digital realm. Maybe that's from a computer to a printer or so on. So specifically in a serial transmission, you have, as usual, a sender and a receiver. I'm going to write that down here. A sender and a receiver. And in a serial transmission, there's only one connection between these two entities. There's one connection which is responsible for the information to be sent across. For example, say we want to send across, I'm going to make this a bit simple. Say we want to send across hello. So accordingly, each letter in the word hello will be sent across one at a time. And that is what serial transmission is essentially one communication line, which is this one here, which is used to send across information. However, in parallel transmission, it's a bit different. We have a sender and a receiver. But instead of having only one line for communication, we have a number of lines. We have maybe 1, 2, 3. We can have X number of lines. And in this case, hello, the word hello will be sent, the letters will be put on separate lines accordingly. So these are two different forms of communicating information, right? We have serial and parallel transmission, different forms of transmitting information. Now, both these forms have their pros and cons. Which are often evaluated when deciding what transmission technique or methodology is used, whether you should use serial or parallel. So say the sender and receiver are very distant from each other. They're very far away from each other. Let's say that. So they're very far away from each other. Say they're in different countries, maybe. They're very far away from each other. Now, what could a potential problem be from this? So say we're using serial transmission. In serial transmission, just to recap, is where we have one transmission line. The positive from this is that data or the information is transferred in an accurate manner. So it's transferred accurately, right? And that's one positive from serial transmission. In parallel transmission, just to recap, write that down, is where we have a number of transmission lines. Now, in a technical sense, this transmission method, especially if you're communicating information between a sender and receiver which are very distant from each other, could have a number of problems. The first problem is something referred to as a skew. A skew is where information is received at different rates. And then there's something called crosstalk. And crosstalk is where essentially these different transmission lines interfere with each other, which essentially result in the information being interchanged in a way. For example, say we have these three lines, which is maybe HEL. Crosstalk is where this E may go to the upper line, this H may go to the bottom line, and this L may go to the middle line. And essentially the information is now ELH, which is wrong. So this is referred to as crosstalk, where these transmission lines interfere with each other. Now, this whole scenario here could be used in an organizational sense, especially when we're connecting it to goals. And I'm going to get into this in just a second. So let's connect this to an organizational sense. Say you're a manager, which is in charge of employees. You're a manager who's in charge of employees, part of a team. Who is a part of a team. And say you have a number of goals which needs to be completed. So you have a number of goals which needs to be completed. And I like using the circle analogy. And say X represents the goals which need to be completed. So you have X. Say we have so many goals which need to be completed in order for the success of the business, right? Success of the business. Now, you're probably wondering, how can serial and parallel transmission be used in this case? How can a computer science concept and be used as an analogy to better understand how to approach goals, right? That's a very good question. Very good question. Now, let's imagine we have a serial transmission. And instead of having a sender and receiver, we're going to have a manager and his or her team. So let me just draw that down. We're going to focus on serial transmission here. So serial transmission. And say we have, as mentioned, your manager, who's in charge of his or her team. And imagine in serial transmission, as you said, there's one communication line. So in this case, we have one communication line connecting the manager and his or her team. Now, in this case, say you have this many goals. You have X number of goals which need to be completed. So, if you communicate a goal, and say, I'm going to write goal here. If you communicate a goal one at a time, the team is more focused, have a higher understanding of what needs to be completed, have a stronger understanding of what needs to be completed. Why it needs to be completed, and a proper understanding of the timeline of when it needs to be completed. So it needs to be completed why, when, and also how. So essentially, this refers all back to a stronger understanding of the goal. A stronger understanding of the goal. And in this case, serial transmission is so powerful. As mentioned in the previous section, serial transmission is so powerful and well known because it's so accurate. In this case, you can just see the level of accuracy and the ability to just give the information to the team in such a accurate and understandable manner, where the team has a better understanding of what needs to be completed, how it needs to be completed, when it needs to be completed, and so on. But what could be the problems with this? The problems is that it could be very slow. It could be too structured. Less agile in a way. And really follows something called the waterfall software lifecycle, or the waterfall model, which is stuff being completed one at a time. Yeah. But still, in this case, serial transmission does have its benefits. The team is better focused, the team knows what's going on, the team has a better understanding of how to complete their goal. Let's move on to parallel transmission. So what about parallel transmission? And we're still going to provide this analogy here where we have a circle, and in the circle represents the goals which need to be completed by, or is provided by the manager to the team. And it's still that manager and team connection. M represents manager and T represents team. Just to recap, a parallel transmission is where there's a number of transmission lines. And this represents the manager, and this represents the team. And say these are the communication lines where the goals are accordingly communicated. So goal 1 is communicated, goal 2 is communicated, goal 3 is communicated, and goal 4 is communicated. Now, recapping from the cons or the problems with parallel transmission, one of the disadvantages we talked about with parallel transmission is skewing. And skewing is where the information is communicated at different times and speeds and at different rates. For example, in this case, goal 3 may be completed before goal 1, goal 2 may be completed before goal 1, goal 1 may be completed last. And that's a problem. When we provide too many goals, when we provide a heavy workload to a team can often get flustered. A team can get flustered in terms of what to prioritize. Can be flustered in terms of what to prioritize. What to prioritize. What to prioritize. How to prioritize. And how to distribute their focus accordingly. Distribute their focus accordingly. And that's a very similar analogy to skewing. And for example, say we have 4 goals and we want to complete these goals at a specific rate, right? Because we're providing so many goals to the team, these goals may be completed at different rates. The team is less focused as opposed to serial transmission, where they're provided one goal and they can have full attention and focus on that one specific goal. And in this case, in parallel transmission, they're provided so many goals which need to be completed, hence resulting in a heavy workload. The team can get flustered in terms of what needs to be done, how it needs to be done, what goals to be focused on, and how to distribute the focus accordingly. And this is where the cons come in, the disadvantages of such a situation. However, a positive could be that the goals are completed at a faster rate. Completed at a faster rate. And what I realized while I'm making this section is that, and this is not really technical, it could be used in a technical sense, in a computer science sense, but this is really used in the interpersonal sense. It really depends on how the goals are created. So it really depends, these two situations really depend on how the goals are created, how the teams are structured, how the team is structured, how goals are prioritized, and that sort of links to how goals are created. So it really depends on how the goals are created, whether they're prioritized, whether they are highlighted in terms of how to be completed, when to be completed, what skills are required, and so on. And how the team is structured. Is a team divided into, for example, programmers, product managers, and so on? Are they divided into a cross-functional department or not? So it really depends on how, on these two factors. So just to summarize here, we've talked about serial transmission and how that could be used in an organizational sense, how there could be one goal communicated at a time between a manager and a team. And we discussed the positives from this and how the team could be more focused on a specific goal and ultimately result in stronger completion, accuracy, completion/accuracy, and also ultimately comfortability, comfort. We also talked about parallel transmission and how we have a number of transmission lines between a manager and a team, and how goals are communicated simultaneously. So goal 1, goal 2, and goal 3, and how they're communicated simultaneously, and the potential problems with that. More specifically, how the team could get flustered with increased workload. How the team could have problems with distributing their focus. Goals may not be completed to full ability, to full capacity. Goals not completed to full capacity. And so on. However, what we derive from this is that there's also some positives from parallel transmission, is that it can be completed at a faster rate. Right? That's one positive. Is that in parallel transmission, stuff could be completed at a faster rate. Communication is done at a faster rate. And what it really depends upon is the information being communicated. It depends on the information being communicated. In this case, the goals. In this case, the goals. And also depends on the teams. And how the team is structured. That's a quick summary there. And now let's dive into how information is communicated and teams are structured. All right, so say we want to we know that serial transmission is beneficial because a team has a stronger understanding on the goal, a more focused understanding on the goal, and so on. But sadly, in today's industry, stuff needs to be completed at an agile rate. And that's what essentially the agile framework is where stuff are completed in an agile manner, interchangeably at different rates, and so on. But the problem is that sometimes a team can get flustered, where they don't have an idea on how to distribute their focus. They have stresses in terms of their workload and so on. But how can we minimize those problems? Ways we could do that is to structure the information we're communicating, the information, and in this case the goals. So the information we're communicating in an easier manner. And say we're communicating the goals which need to be completed between the manager and team. And the goals need to be communicated in a easy and simple manner. Simple manner. For example, what needs to be covered is what needs to be done, when, this includes the time frame, how, this includes the skills needed, who's needed for the task. And this is how the information should be structured. The goals and the goals being communicated between the manager and team should be structured. And by structuring our information like this would ensure that problems like we talked about, skewing, where goals are completed at different rates, is not a problem. Because now the team will have a better understanding. The team will have a better understanding of what goals to prioritize that may be according to time, effort, skill, etc. So by restructuring the information we're sending into a more easier and digestible format, the team has a better understanding on how to complete the tasks in an orderly fashion, where we ensure that the goals are completed at an equal rate, or in a rate or in an order which is most suitable. The last point is how we still have the manager and team connection. So we're still communicating the goals between the manager and team. What we could do is restructure the team. We could look at the structure of the team. As talked about, there could be problems with the team not being able to complete the goals at a suitable fashion or time frame. And this could, as talked about before, could be because the goals aren't properly explained or structured in a more understandable format, or this could be due to the team's structure. Now, I'm not too familiar with how teams are structured. However, I did take a course in product management. And according to a specific industry or the specific business you're in, the team could be structured in a way where each team or a team is divided into sub-teams, where a particular sub-team can focus on goal 1, goal 2, goal 3, and so on. Or this could be done in a different fashion. Essentially, the main idea is that the team structure needs to be looked at, because this ultimately impacts the way the information is received, comprehended, and acted upon. So if you have a team which is not structured well and is not able to receive information and understand it, then the problems with parallel transmission will kick in. Goals will not be completed at an adequate rate, and so on. But if you have a team which is structured well, they'll be able to understand the information better, act upon it, and ensure the problems do not occur. For example, the goals are completed at an adequate and equal rate, and then the team has full and divided attention on the goals, where they provide full effort and complete it to the best of best standard. I really hope this makes sense, because this is kind of new to me, these kind of lectures, to be honest, and I'm trying my best at it, but I hope it makes sense.